everyone, and welcome to the Neo Gentrics Multiverse official podcast.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so for you listening right now, consider this your foundational briefing. We're calling this Deep Dive Episode 0, Welcome to the Multiverse.
The perfect place to start.
Right, and normally when you open up a new fantasy book, you expect to just sort of step into a room.
Yeah, self-contained thing.
Exactly. You know the feeling. It's a localized little world with its own specific rules, its own history. And then when you finally close the back cover, you just leave that room behind.
Right, you move on.
But looking at this massive stack of sources you brought to the table for us today, I mean, I don't feel like I'm stepping into a room at all.
Not even close.
No, it feels much more like standing at the very edge of a newly discovered galaxy, where like every single star is an entirely different narrative, but there is this unseen gravity holding them all together in this perfect, delicate balance.
Oh, I really like that analogy, the galaxy. Because building a universe on that kind of scale mapping, not just the individual stars, but, the dark matter connecting them, that requires an architect who thinks in 3 dimensions.
Totally.
And today, we are auditing that architecture. Because to prevent a world of this sheer size from just collapsing under its own narrative weight into total chaos, you need a framework that is practically engineered.
Which brings us to the real mission for today's deep dive. We are not just looking at a standalone piece of fiction today.
No, we definitely aren't.
We are officially auditing a massive, fully interconnected cosmic multiverse. And the architect behind all of this, the creator who has been laying these tracks for years, is an author known as Neo Gentrics.
Neo is the real-world visionary who sparked this entire galaxy. And honestly, the timeline of his dedication is staggering.
It's a huge milestone, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We are looking at a 10-year milestone of just continuous, relentless world building. His publishing journey actually began way back in July 2016.
Wow. 2016.
Yeah. And a decade of writing isn't just about putting words on a page. It's about sustaining a cohesive vision without letting all those threads tangle.
10 years. I mean, let's just pause and appreciate the logistical nightmare that implies.
A lot of spreadsheets.
I can only imagine. We're talking about keeping multiple timelines straight across a literal decade of publishing, and Neo hasn't just been writing linear sequels to one single story either.
No, he's built out a massive, sprawling catalog over that decade.
Right. We're talking about entirely distinct series like the Voidmaster series and the Elementalist, which somehow all exist within this exact same overarching framework. How do you even begin to track the variables there?
Well, you build what is known in the industry as a universe Bible.
A universe Bible, okay.
Yeah. But Neo's version is uniquely meticulous because when you have a multiverse, you aren't just tracking character names or simple geography.
What else is in there?
You're tracking divergent timelines, the evolutionary biology of entirely different planets, distinct magic systems, and centuries of character lineages.
That sounds exhausting to manage.
It is. The Universe Bible is basically the master ledger managing every single behind-the-scenes connection. It ensures that a law of physics or a magical limitation established in one book isn't accidentally broken in another series that takes place light years away.
Okay, wait, let me push back on that structural rigidity for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If you have this master document dictating the gravitational constants of planets and ensuring every single butterfly effect aligns across a dozen different books, doesn't that run the risk of becoming just a sterile encyclopedia?
That's a very fair point.
Like, how does a creator keep a universe this meticulously governed from losing its heartbeat? It seems like it could so easily start to read like an engineering manual rather than an actual story.
Yeah, the risk of structural suffocation is huge in complex world building. It is super easy to lose the human element when you are hyper-focused on the math of the universe. But what keeps Neo's multiverse from feeling sterile is the fact that the underlying foundation of all these rules isn't purely mathematical. The rigid laws of this universe are built on top of a profoundly painful, raw human reality.
Oh, wow. So the mechanics are complex, but the emotional core is bleeding.
Exactly. The psychological weight of Neo Gentrics books is incredibly dense, and that density comes directly from his real-world experiences.
Tell me more about that.
Well, growing up in Georgia, Neo survived extreme adversity. He was navigating and enduring intense systemic racism.
Man, that's heavy.
It is. And dealing with those harsh realities, especially at a young age, forces the development of a very specific, profound personal resilience.
Yeah, it forces you to adapt to survive.
Exactly. And in his writing, that resilience becomes the fundamental gravity of the multiverse. The survival tactics he had to learn are translated directly into his fiction.
So the logistical framework is ultimately anchored by this deeply personal, emotional bedrock.
That's spot on.
Which means the conflicts in these stories are carrying a lot more weight than your standard hero's journey. Like, the heroes in this multiverse aren't just fighting random beasts hoarding gold in a cave somewhere.
Far from it. The antagonists and the societal structures in these books function as literal manifestations of systemic injustice.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the heroes are battling deeply flawed, oppressive systems. They're carrying the heavy, exhausting psychological weight of their own traumas and marginalization.
So the monsters aren't just monsters.
Right, the monsters they fight are often physical embodiments of prejudice and erasure.
That is such a fascinating subversion of the genre, because let's be honest, classical fantasy is usually treated as pure escapism.
For sure.
We read about dragons and wizards to run away from real-world issues like taxes, politics, and systemic oppression.
Yeah, to take a break from reality.
But Neo uses the trappings of the fantasy genre to run directly towards those issues.
He really does.
It makes me wonder, though, does anchoring magic and cosmic battles in the reality of systemic oppression and racism make the fantasy more accessible to a wider audience, or does it demand significantly more emotional labor from the reader?
I mean, it absolutely demands more emotional labor. You can't just check your brain at the door with his books.
Yeah, I'd imagine not.
You're forced to witness characters dealing with the crushing weight of systemic marginalization, which can be an uncomfortable mirror to reality for some people.
Definitely.
But that exact struggle is also what makes the story vastly more accessible and resonant.
How so?
Well, for anyone who has ever felt trapped or crushed by an unfair system in the real world, seeing a character navigate a fantastical version of that same struggle is incredibly validating.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, when the hero wins in Neo's universe, it's not just a victory over a dark lord. It's a victory over trauma. It honors the reader's own real-world survival.
That's incredibly powerful. So to truly see how this trauma, this systemic oppression, and this deep-seated resilience actually manifest in the lore, we need to examine the very first entry point of this entire multiverse.
The spark that lit the galaxy, so to speak.
Exactly.
That takes us directly to the book that started it all in 2016. It's called The Whistling Swordsman: Beginnings. And honestly, it's the perfect microcosm for all the larger themes we've been discussing today.
Let's dive right into the core premise here, because the hook is just so immediate.
It really pulls you in.
We follow our protagonist, a young man named Xeonix Novus, and at the start of the story, he is living a relatively quiet, unassuming life in a region known as the Orion Lands.
Just kind of keeping his head down.
Right. But there is this massive, unavoidable shadow hanging over his family, which is the mysterious disappearance of his grandfather.
And his grandfather wasn't just some local patriarch either. He was Xeonix, known throughout the lore of this world as the legendary Whistling Swordsman.
A total legend.
Yeah, and for young Xeonix, that legacy is a dual-edged sword. Like, it's a point of immense pride, obviously, but it's also a super heavy burden and just a complete mystery.
Right, because he doesn't actually know what happened.
Exactly. He is living the aftermath of a legend without knowing the full truth of his own family's history.
And as is tradition in these kinds of stories, the quiet life never lasts.
No, it never does.
An unthinkable tragedy strikes, completely tearing Xeonix's family apart, and suddenly, the entire continent of Pikodesh is thrown into absolute chaos.
The safe world just completely shatters. And that's when the systemic violence rushes in to fill the void.
Which brings up the survival themes again.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is where the themes of survival and resilience really take center stage. Xeonix is forced out of his quiet life and onto a path of sheer survival. And that path leads him to a pivotal character.
Kenshin Sensei.
Right.
The classic mentor figure steps in.
Right.
But from what I read, Kenshin isn't just a random wandering master.
Not at all. Kenshin Sensei was actually a former student of Xeonix's missing grandfather.
Oh, wow. The connections are already forming.
Yeah, he serves as the living bridge between the lost legacy of Xeon and the raw, untapped potential of Xeonix. So Kenshin takes the young man under his wing to teach him his family's ancient legacy.
Which brings us to the magic system.
Yes. It introduces us to one of the most mechanically fascinating aspects of this universe, the martial arts system.
Reading through the sources, the combat descriptions completely caught my eye. Kenshin teaches Xeonix the Sword of the Whistling Wind.
Such a cool name.
It is. And it's immediately clear that this isn't just basic swordplay. It's this high-concept martial style that harmonizes directly with the elemental power of the wind itself.
Right.
But mechanically, looking at how it's described, it feels like Xeonix isn't just swinging a piece of metal.
What do you mean?
Well, is the sword acting almost like a tuning fork? Like, is he swinging it at a specific angle and frequency to physically manipulate the ambient air pressure?
That is the exact physical mechanism at play. It's fluid dynamics and acoustics applied to combat.
That is insane.
It's so smart. The Sword of the Whistling Wind relies on creating localized pressure differentials. So, by striking at precise angles and speeds, the blade catches the air to generate distinct frequencies. That's the whistle.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So a high-frequency strike might create a micro-vacuum that pulls an opponent off balance, while a broad, low-frequency swing could compress the air into an actual concussive shockwave.
So he is literally playing the elements like an orchestra of destruction.
That's a great way to put it.
Every strike, every movement channels acoustic physics to weaponize the air around him. It's a highly scientific martial art that's masquerading as traditional elemental magic.
Exactly. He's composing destruction in order to survive.
Yeah.
And he desperately needs that power because the stakes he is facing are brutally high.
Yeah, he goes through a lot.
Xeonix finds himself navigating the fiery destruction of his own hometown and literally marching into blood-soaked, historic battlefields.
And he isn't just fighting random bandits either.
No. He is facing down enemies whose sole goal is to completely erase his lineage from existence.
They don't just want to defeat him in combat. They want to wipe his family's history off the map entirely.
Which ties right back into what we were saying earlier about the themes of battling oppressive systems.
Right. Erasing a people's history is a classic tool of systemic oppression. They are trying to silence his legacy so that his family's impact on the world is just forgotten.
The combat is deeply personal, and it's entirely rooted in resisting that erasure. But as we analyze this, something incredibly clever starts to happen with the narrative structure here.
Oh, here we go.
On the surface, the martial arts, the destroyed hometown, the elemental magic, and the mentor figure, all of these elements seem firmly rooted in very classical traditional fantasy tropes.
You've got swords, senseis, and warring kingdoms.
Exactly. But the true scale of this conflict is actually cosmic.
Okay, for everyone listening, brace yourselves, because this is where the entire deep dive flips on its head.
It really does.
This is the genre-bending twist that shows us what Neo Gentrics is actually building. You're reading The Whistling Swordsman, thinking you're strapped in for a classical fantasy epic.
If you are, but
this book is actually the gateway to a massive sci-fi multiverse.
we finally see the universe Bible flexing its muscles here. And the pivot is stunning because it doesn't abandon the fantasy. It recontextualizes it.
Right.
Xeonix becomes so desperate for answers about his lineage and so determined to uncover the truth behind his grandfather's disappearance that he essentially defies the fundamental laws of nature.
What does he do?
He defies time itself and ventures directly into the past.
And he doesn't just cast some generic time travel spell, right? He gets help from a character named Zeril.
Yes, Zeril.
And the sources explicitly describe Zeril as a master of space manipulation from a connected timeline.
Which is such a cool detail.
Yeah, let me think about the physics of that for a second. If Zeril is manipulating space, meaning he is taking the linear fabric of reality, folding it tightly enough that two distant points actually touch, he's essentially creating a localized gravitational wormhole.
Yeah, that's the science of it.
And because extreme gravity dilates time, traversing that spatial fold would inherently cause temporal displacement.
Bingo.
We went from classical swords and senseis to literal quantum space manipulation.
The extrapolation there is spot on. He is utilizing astrophysics to break the chronological timeline. You think you understand the boundaries of the world, magic, swords, medieval-style kingdoms, and suddenly Neo pulls the camera way, way back.
It's dizzying in the best way.
You realize you're operating inside a sci-fi universe where space-time itself is a malleable force. Zeril's ability to fold space is what allows this forbidden temporal jump to happen.
It's like digging a cellar under a medieval stone castle and accidentally unearthing a hyperdrive spaceship.
That's exactly what it feels like.
The tonal whiplash is incredible, but because of that universe Bible we talked about, the mechanics actually hold together perfectly.
They do.
And the visual of where this space-time manipulation actually drops Xeonix is just breathtaking. The temporal jump places him face-to-face with his own grandfather, Xeon.
Right in the middle of it all.
Yes, right in the absolute midst of a brutal, historic war.
The psychological implications of that exact moment are staggering. I mean, think about it. Xeonix has spent his entire life growing up under the shadow of this legendary missing figure.
Right, he only knows the stories.
He has only known the myth of the Whistling Swordsman. And suddenly, the myth is stripped away. He isn't hearing stories by a campfire anymore. He is standing right next to the man covered in the mud and the blood of a forgotten war.
Wow.
A war that, completely unbeknownst to the modern world, shaped their entire present reality.
It fundamentally changes how we view the conflict. It proves that these battles they're fighting against oppression, against erasure, they literally echo eternally across generations.
Yes.
Xeonix is fighting the exact same war his grandfather fought, just at a different coordinate in the space-time continuum.
It brings everything full circle back to the emotional bedrock of Neo's work. The trauma of the past is never truly in the past.
It's an ongoing reality.
It's an active, ongoing reality that the present generation have to confront. And by introducing time travel, Neo makes the metaphor of generational trauma completely literal.
That is brilliant.
If you want to understand the systemic rot of the present, and if you want to know how to heal the future, you have to literally travel back to the source of the wound.
Wow, you really can't just check your brain at the door with this one.
Definitely not.
So what does this all mean for you listening as we continue to audit this universe? It means we have successfully mapped the outer borders of a stunning 10-year legacy.
We really have.
We are looking at a universe built on profound personal resilience, driven by acoustically engineered elemental magic, and expanded by time-bending quantum sci-fi, all meticulously engineered by Neo Gentrics.
The foundation is set. We understand the architect. We have analyzed the blueprint of the Universe Bible, and we've felt the emotional gravity that holds all these disparate timelines together.
So get ready, because now that we have the map, it is time to start exploring the territory. Our next deep dive, what we are calling Episode 2, is going to dive directly into Chapter 1 of the Whistling Swordsman, Beginnings.
I can't wait for that.
We are going to meet Xeonix Novus, right on page 1, unpack his early life in the Orion lands, and trace the physics of every single swing of that whistling sword.
The mechanics of those early battles are going to be so fascinating to break down now that we know the cosmic stakes behind them.
Absolutely. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought to mull over as you process everything we've uncovered today.
Lay it on us.
If time travel in Neo's universe proves that historical battles literally echo eternally across generations, does that mean trauma isn't just an emotional state, but an actual physical force in the multiverse?
Oh, wow.
Like a thermodynamic energy that actually has to be fought and balanced in every single timeline.
That is a very heavy question to leave us on.
Something to think about as you look up at all those stars. We'll see you in Episode 2.